Hello, I'm going to do my best here at explaining The Richest Man in Babylon. I just finished the book. I listened to the audiobook. I didn't have the actual physical book, but for my purposes, I like to read or listen to the audiobook versus the actual physical book. But nonetheless, let's get into it. So, right now, I'm going to do the best I can and explain the book. As far as what I took from it, I learned that you need to pay off your debts. You need to make sure that you are working and you're not really being lazy, and that it's good to have a good work ethic. And it's important to manage your money the best you can. So, going into the book, I thought that there was going to be a different storyline to it. It turns out that it was more or less about a king or series of kings that were explaining how they got rich. And a lot of times the people that were asking the kings about why they're so greedy and stuff like that, when reality was that they just didn't know how to make money, and that the kings were making money because they took the time to learn how to make money. But everybody always wants to be given something. They never want to work for it. So that was kind of like the underlying principle that I took from it. So I took some notes so that I could better prepare this podcast. So Babylon fell, I think, to a person named Cyrus. It was a war, and Cyrus won. The army of Cyrus won, and that's when Babylon fell. So there was something to be said for the lessons to be learned from Babylon, like the scriptures from it and how they made money back then. So it never rose again, but we can take a lot from this book in Babylon. It's important to pay everyone and that you owe money to, but it's also just as equally important to pay yourself, and that you shouldn't spend stuff on clothes and shoes that you don't necessarily need, so it's like needs versus wants. And a lot of times people are broke because they pay everybody else first but themselves, type of thing. Let's see here. So there was something about the slaves. So they were talking about slaves back then and how some of the kings in the book were once slaves. There was a story that was told where the king was once a slave, and that people didn't know that about him. But that's kind of where his story was lied at. And he came out of poverty and worked his way up to financial freedom, in that he says that work will help you buy your own freedom. So it is good to work, but the mindset has to be right as well. I said the willingness to work helps people get out of poverty, and that you should be humble along your journey. So about the slave owners, there was a story in the book where one of the kings was a slave, and that he ended up being a slave or bidded on as I think it was like a camel caretaker, and then the lady, the queen, that finally let him go, and he was no longer a slave anymore, because she told him, or kind of was trying to help him get his mind right, but she called him a weakling, and he said, "I'm not a weakling." Then she said, "Why don't you instead make yourself strong in the financial world versus your physical labor?" And he took that, he didn't take it lightly, and then he ended up getting himself out of that slavery and into financial prosperity. He became a slave because he didn't want to repay his debts. He was constantly running away from his financial worries, and ultimately that led him to poverty, and he didn't want to change his ways, and he chose to stay poor. So that was kind of his problem there. And when the queen told him that although he worked hard, he was a weakling in the financial area, and that it's better to be smart versus like working hard all the time. But hard work will make you a better person. And that work was the best friend that he had ever known, looking back. And on another note, the rewards of paying back your creditors can be very rewarding because of the fact that you are becoming more of a respectable person, like loyal person, trustworthy, honest. The fact that you're able to pay people back says a lot about a person versus just borrowing money and then not really paying people back. Doesn't look good. Because if you're just drifting along in life and you don't have a financial plan, you're going to end up kind of not getting the financial prosperity that you desire. So it's important. That's what like paying people back kind of teaches you as well. Another thing is that you don't want to trust people who don't know anything about money. You wouldn't, as in the book says, pay a shepherd to manage your money when all they know is sheep. So that's really important. And one of the other things is living on less money than you earn. You want to know how to budget. That's what the book was telling us, that you want to know how to budget your money because you never want to spend more than you make. That's one of the rules. There were other cities that were, I don't know if you want to say envious, but they were noticing Babylon and the tablets that had the written rules for financial freedom on them. So there was people talking about it. Others wanted to learn from those tablets. And so that was kind of about it. Again, he used to be a slave, but he rised above it all. And towards the end of the book, the king was older now, and there was something about a grandson or something like that wanted to follow the footsteps of his grandfather. And the fact that he was in his situation, it was inspiring to him to hear his grandfather's story, and that the wealth there is the mindset. It starts with a mindset. So I did take a lot from this book. Again, I didn't know what the story was going to be exactly going in there. I thought for some reason it was going to be like The Alchemist, just how the title of the book, The Richest Man in Babylon. Like, I didn't really think so much about it, but the whole idea was there was like a lot of rules and stuff as far as how you manage money, and that the mindset has a lot to do with it. I took from the book that there are very simple principles that should be followed when you're learning how to increase your wealth, and that was earning more money, lending money out to people, knowing who you're lending to, having the mindset. I'm doing the best I can at explaining this, but that's kind of what I took from the book. There is something to be said for hard work. You want to make sure that you pay people back, but also make sure that you pay yourself. I'm going to end it on that note because I think that that's kind of what I learned. And do I recommend this book for anybody? I think it's a good place to start. This book has some very sound principles in it. Do I think it's the only book that you should read? No, I don't think it. I think it's more telling a tale of this person in this culture, and I think it has a lot of valuable information. But I do also think that there's a lot more books out there that you can read that will impact you in a more profitable way. Like there's just a lot of books out there, and I don't stop reading. The next book I'm going to be reading is a negotiation book. I think negotiation is important. But yeah, there's there's a lot of information in this Richest Man of Babylon book. It's not a hard read at all. I think it's pretty straightforward. What I usually take from these kinds of storybooks is how I learn is, again, by teaching it to other people or doing what I'm doing here with the podcast. But I noticed over the years, I do remember what I read. I don't think that we always I think we think we're going to forget what we read, but the truth is, reading kind of sits in your subconscious mind and you think about it later. For example, I remember some of the books, like on negotiating, that I read in the past and how that made me feel that day, and I think it's important to imagine while you're reading, and that's kind of how you remember books even more. But also one of the things I'm doing now is I'm taking notes while I read. I think that's really important to really get the most out of a book. I appreciate you listening to this podcast, and stay tuned because I'm going to be coming out with another podcast here about the next book I'm reading. So I hope you have a good day, and thank you for listening. Bye.